our third speaker today. It is Dr. Zac Goldman. I asked him before, do you want me to call you doctor? And he's like, nah, it's okay, but I'm going to call him too because my sister just got her doctorate. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. Okay, so Zac is the director of online teaching and learning in the College of Business, and as the director of the online MBA program at the university, he's also an associate professor of practice and management on entrepreneurship. Dr. Goldman has been recognized by the journal Communication Education as being in the top 1% of communication scholars from 2012 to 2016, and again in 2017 to 2021 for his research, productivity, and publications in academic journals. Under Dr. Goldman's leadership, the UofL's OMBA debuted as the top 50 in the United States News and World Report rankings for online MBA programs after launching in 2019. In addition to leading the online MBA program, Dr. Goldman helps to expand and improve the COB's entire online portfolio, including undergraduate and graduate programs. Zac also develops and facilitates executive education programming for the University of Louisville and continues to teach business topics including managerial communication, leadership, feedback, and public management. Zac earned his PhD from West Virginia University, and he's originally, you have a fan back there, originally a native of Southern Indiana, where he currently resides. And we realized we live a mile apart just now. So please welcome Dr. Zac Goldman. So Zac's fun fact today is he has 12 brothers and sisters. Wow. So, Zac Goldman.
It's not just a fun fact today. That's been a fun fact my whole life. But thank you, Olivia. And I want to start by thanking Ramey and Ryan and the Center for Positive Leadership for putting this event on. If you could help me in doing that, please. Some of you may have saw there was a photo taken of the affiliates, and it's just a real incredible honor to be featured among them and to be a part of this center and to be able to contribute to the work that they're doing. So thank you all for the hard work that you continue to do in support of our community. I'm here today to talk about the Online Team and Community Index, a relatively new tool that has been years in the making. And I'll get into that here in just a short moment, but you do have that via a handout in your folder. If you want to go ahead and open that up, we'll start going through it here momentarily. But while you do that, I want to kind of set the stage, at least in terms of how that particular tool came to be, but also this idea of forming teams, forming communities, maintaining those teams and communities in an online space. And I want to kind of go way back here for a second to really put this into perspective. When you look at this photo, I'd ask you to take a moment and kind of look at it up here on the screen. What stands out to you, or what do you notice? Any thoughts come to mind? Yeah.
They're all gathered around something.
They are, yeah. So there's a gathering of some kind. I would acknowledge that and agree with that. Any other thoughts come out? Yeah.
Relaxed body language and focus.
Yeah.
All focusing on a similar goal.
For sure. Yeah, certainly a relaxing kind of commonality among them that is felt through this photo. Yeah.
They're in the middle of nowhere, but they're together.
Sure.
They have a small community.
Small community. It does feel, based on the stars and some of the wilderness we see in the background, that they are not in a populated area or heavily populated area. I agree with that too. Other thoughts? Yeah, Kim.
They are cold.
They're cold. Yeah, I think you can base that there as well, for sure. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I feel they're communicating.
Communicating. Yeah, storytelling for sure. I can see where that impression would come from. Any other thoughts?
They're resourceful. They have fire.
They are resourceful. They do have a fire. I agree with that as well. Yeah, Suha?
Contemplating something.
Yeah, there could be some bigger contemplation going on. Certainly could acknowledge that. Any other thoughts? Matt, anything look familiar to you from this? Matt is a member. I'll talk about Matt and our online programs office team in just a moment. Matt has worked with me and has created far more than I. This is AI generated, Matt. I didn't know if you noticed the authorship of your own work at all, but
I knew that, but I wasn't.
So here's what really stands out to me about this photo, and here's why I show it. One, it is AI generated, which just gives you a glimpse into the future, because most of us wouldn't necessarily recognize that, and yet that's what technology is capable of producing with just a few sentences of prompting that I gave it. But what stands out to me about this and what imagery I was wanting to instill in all of you this morning is that we have always developed teams and communities in person. Always, since our existence as humans, right? We're talking thousands and thousands of years. Humans have formed teams, they have formed communities through being in a similar or shared space. I know there's 1,000 reasons for that, right? We go all the way back to caveman painting times. This is for protection. It's for maintaining some sense of existence. We flash forward thousands of years later, and we know that communities that have thrived in person help to grow prosperity, and that some of the biggest cities in the world were developed that way because people shared a space together and were able to form teams and communities within those spaces. What's really interesting to me is that we are entering, and we are actually well into it at this point, a very new era in our existence as humans. And what I mean by that is since the creation of the internet, does anybody want to date that? Approximately what time was the internet created?
Early 82.
So according to Wikipedia, which you never know, but January of 1983 was the unofficial birthday. So it just celebrated 40 years, by the way. I hope you all did something to celebrate the birthday of the internet. But just celebrating roughly 4 decades of the existence of the internet, what we are now living in is a world where individuals, human beings, can create community online. Right? And we know this in 1,000 different ways. We can go online. Many of us are probably members of an online community of some kind, a Facebook group, perhaps a Reddit thread that you're a part of, a Twitter page, whatever it is that you interact with online, some capacity you connect with, you belong to, you feel identified with. Olivia talked about that sense of belonging earlier. We're certainly seeing a version of that online today in this era. The photo that you're looking at now is a group of online MBA students from the University of Louisville. This is a group of individuals along with a cohort and a program that I'm incredibly proud of. Have even a couple of affiliates of that program and or students and or alumni here in this room. Shout out to Carla for just graduating in December. Very proud of you. The reason I love this program so much and the reason I love these students so much is because not only do these photos represent the people behind the screen, they remind us that despite modality, despite the manner or the tools that we use to communicate and connect with, community is still community. Right? Community is still a concept that while we can't always grab it and feel it and really put our hands on it, we know it when it exists. And we can feel and we understand its impact when we come across it. And so this was a team that actually, photo was taken, I believe, last fall. And I don't know the exact moment it was taken because I do know over here, this is my assignment. They were working on an assignment for my course right here. So Carla, I don't know if you remember smiling this much for my assignments. Most students do not. But they are obviously sharing a moment here as a team, coming together, forming relationships. And this is a big part of what we've done and built at the University of Louisville in our online MBA program. And why is that relevant? Well, the online MBA program is roughly 5 years old. We're getting ready to celebrate our own major milestone this coming fall with the welcoming edition of our 10th cohort, which is really exciting because in this time period, we've learned and grown and done a lot of things. And I'm here as one of many members of an online programs office that generated or began in 2020, joined by 3 of my colleagues, Safoni, Tricia, and Matt in the back. Much of their contributions are in this presentation and in this tool that you're going to be learning about here today. But in 2019, this article or this feature was made on WDRB announcing the start of our online MBA program. I actually think this was 2018 when it was announced. 2 things stand out to me about this image. Number 1, it was the unofficial debut or announcement of our program. And number 2, we were still really good at basketball at the time at UofL because we just won a game. We're on the rebound, though. I feel it. We're coming soon on that front. But it's a program that has been in existence now for, again, about half a decade. And the things that we've learned in that half a decade are remarkable, right? Because not only have we been able to build programs, to build curriculum, to build courses, to build services, but what we've done is we've graduated 600 alumni in that 4-year period. We're preparing to graduate another 100 plus this coming spring, and we have over 200 still actively enrolled in the program. And the reason I share those numbers with you is because that's 600 people. 800, if you count those who are still in the program, will be well over 1,000 alumni within the next 2 years. And there's a lot that we've learned from those people. Those people have contributed so much to shaping what we do at the University of Louisville, what we do to support our online students, and more importantly, within the context of this presentation, what we do to support online teams and communities. Okay, because there's a whole area of research out there that I'm not going to get a chance to dive deep into with you today, but I will tell you some of it is featured on the front page, or the second page, I guess, of your materials there. So if you're interested in that, we can certainly discuss it more, but you see referenced or cited to several studies that have been done and or best practices that were used. Because what I really want to focus our time on today, based on what we've learned from these amazing alumni and the students who have come through our program, and the amazing staff and faculty who have worked to support those students and build and develop these teams, I'd like to share with you the Online Community and Team Index, which is really a gathering of our insights, a gathering of all that we've learned about what makes for a successful remote or hybrid team. And there's a lot of ways that you here in this room can apply what we've learned and what we've built here in front of you. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through this instrument. We are going to have a chance to use it today as well, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you will, turn with me. Let's go ahead and skip over to that second, third page area there if you want to follow along with this, because I'm going to be referencing quite a bit from that in just a moment. So first, a little more context as we dive into this. Online teams. What is that, Zach, and why is that important? Well, our program, the MBA program, is a cohort-driven program. It means we only start 2 times a year. So you can either start in the fall with us in the August intake, or you can start in January, which we consider a spring intake. It always occurs to me that academics we call January spring. I wish that were the case, but as we have seen the last few weeks, it feels nothing like that. But we did just have a group start this past January here a few weeks ago who has started in the program. The OTCI comes relevant because within the first month of them being in the program, they're put into a team. Now that process in and of itself could have a long conversation that my colleagues Tricia and Safoni will be happy, I'm sure, to talk to you about on your way out or at a later time. But they do a lot of work to develop these teams, right? To create a strong foundation for teams to start to come together and form relationships. They take into account all types of variables, right? We want our teams to reflect our communities. We want our teams to reflect the workplaces that our students are going to end up working in. So we don't just pair them all based on their backgrounds or all based on their race and ethnicity or all based on their geography. All of those variables come into play. All those variables have to be accounted for. And we want a team that really reflects the type of individuals and the types of workplaces that these individuals are going to go off to inhabit and work in. And so when they are formed, they're then put together, and as Carla will tell you, and as others who have gone through the program can tell you, they are asked to work together in various ways. Some require them to work extensively for a prolonged period of time. Others, they simply have to touch base with each other on a semi-regular basis. Ryan's course, many may not know, Ryan teaches in the Online MBA, a strategy course for us. In that course, they have to do a pretty extensive simulation. How'd you do, Carla, by the way? First place. Wow, congratulations. I didn't even know that. But they do a pretty extensive simulation where they are required to work together for prolonged periods of time, making these critical decisions. And so there's a whole range of experiences that our teams have, that our students have working in teams. But what I want to present to you today, and this tool that we're going to talk about, is what really makes the effective team stand out. What makes the good teams great, and how do teams start to fall apart if we're not managing them or monitoring them carefully. And while much of this was based on online MBA students, these are also professionals, right? These are workers, these are employees. This is something that every single one of us can relate to, whether or not you are working in a truly remote team, a hybrid team, have one member of your team who's remote, whatever the circumstance or setting is that you and your team find yourself in today, I hope that this tool will be helpful for you. And as we walk through it, I think we'll see different ways that it will be. So 5 dimensions that this tool represents, and I'll kind of unpack why these 5 dimensions have emerged in the ways that they have. Purpose, trust, collaboration, and community and communication, all come into play here within this dimension. All right, let's talk about purpose first. So we all know the general idea of purpose. We certainly recognize it when we see it, but I like this kind of phrase here. Hard work is painful without purpose, but with it we can achieve greatness. When I think about purpose, I think about some of the most challenging things that we have to accomplish and how important purpose is in those moments. Writing a dissertation, correct, Cami? So I don't know about there's others in this room who have written a dissertation, and there's others who aspire to do such things. I will tell you it's not for the faint of heart for anybody who's gone through that process. And I can remember many times in late hours of the night or morning staring at a computer thinking, I don't know how I'm going to accomplish this. I don't think I'm going to finish this particular task or goal. And in those moments, more so than any others, purpose is necessary. Why are you getting a dissertation? Why are you finishing a dissertation?
Because I want to expand on cultural competency learning for HR practitioners.
Remember it. Keep it, right? And you're going to do it, Dr. Owens. I imagine that's going to be the case very soon. All right, so purpose, we know those moments of resiliency. We know those moments of triumph and challenge that are really core to the work that we do. That's when you'll notice purpose the most. So take a look at the items there. If you're on page, I think 3, we don't have page numbers on this yet. It is a developmental tool, so we're going to continuously refine some of this. But if you're looking at the actual items themselves, there are 5 of them here. And this is an appropriate time to mention a few things before I set you off to complete each item, and we'll go through section by section together. So these items are self-report assessment, strongly disagree to strongly agree, 5-point Likert scale. All right. What I'm going to ask you to do, and the referent points within them states my online community or team. So we're working on a digital version of this, which will actually just allow you to put the name of your team in here. But for now, that's going to be the generic referent point that we all use to complete this assessment. Even if your team is mostly in person, but maybe some remote days, even if your team is not in a traditional remote environment like some of us may anticipate or being working from home, I want you to go through, and we'll take just a few minutes for each of these categories, and read through the items and to the best of your ability, write a number 1 through 5 next to each of them, indicating your level of agreement. And I'll tell you what we're going to do with all these scores, and we'll do some calculations and things here in a little while. But I'll give you a few minutes for each category, 5 items each requiring 1 response with a number from 1 through 5. Level of disagreement to agreement, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. And I will tell you too, that 3, that middle marker, that's neutral. So if you're like, I don't really know, it's not as relevant, it's not as applicable, or I'm kind of neutral, that's where your anchor point is. Take a few minutes and we'll jump into the next category. All right, let's talk about the second dimension for a moment, and then we will put big picture back onto all of this and how these things fit together. But the second dimension is trust. And you've heard that word used at least a half a dozen times today already. I know here at our table it was referenced frequently during some of the scenario planning that Michelle walked us through. And I want you to really think about why trust is such an important part of an online team and when and how it falls apart. Okay? We were talking about, I forget whether it was scenario 5 or 6, but the manager who's frequently checking in, right? Who's overly checking in. This idea of trust, I think, is pretty salient in a situation like that. And many of us can relate to experiences like that, right? Because so much of trust is predicated on what? You ever stop to think about this? Vulnerability, action, communication, all true points. Honesty, I agree with that. Perception. Let's unpack this for a second. You're right on all these fronts. Perception. What do you mean by that?
I think a lot of times it comes down to perception of intent.
Yeah.
When I think about the people that I interact with, where there's a lack of trust, there's a misunderstanding of intent.
Yeah. I do think that's a big part. I'd go one step further even. When you say perception, I think of something else as well, and I think of what we can see, right? Trust is so oftentimes influenced by what we can see. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? You trust that when you walk out to your car today, you're going to be able to do so without little problem or little challenge. And yet you're doing so because you can see the steps in front of you. You can see the fact that there's not tornadoes flying around or anything else. And you're relying on this vision, this sight that so many of us take for granted. And so many of us took for granted prior to March of 2020 when we could see our team members on a regular basis and say, I know Laura's working on that project. Why? Well, because I see Laura every other week and her and I talk regularly, and that level of sight, that level of communication that I take for granted was suddenly taken away from me in 2020 for many people and for many managers. And so what happens as a result? Well, they start doing those check-ins, right? Things that they would normally have never done. They would have normally never stopped by every half an hour to your office, say, you still working, right? And yet now people do that. Why? Well, because their trust has been shaken. And I would also offer their level of control has been shaken. which so many of us take for granted as well and or do not question. But the idea of control, as we were talking about at this table, is baked into a lot of the work that we do. And so I was laughing and also still questioning 20 plus years later why the first ever job I had, I punched a physical time clock. I know, I'm dating myself here a little bit. You're wondering, how old is that guy? That's a question we'll answer later maybe. But time clocks, I punched one. And I remember the first time I ever pulled that time sheet out, it had the seconds on there. 9:48 and 52 seconds. Why the hell do we care about the seconds that somebody has clocked in? It's bad enough that you clocked in at 9:52, but I need to know it's 9:52 and 55 seconds. That is a different conversation that we're going to have, right? It's a level of control, ladies and gentlemen. That is something that has been baked into our workplace experiences for most of us our entire adult lives, right? We don't have a lot of time to sit around and question that or think about that, but it's part of the experience, and it's also part of what remote workers deal with on a regular basis now in very different ways, in very new ways. So trust is important. Great teamwork begins with it. We know that. And yet so much of what we have done to build trust over time was called into question when many of us were forced remote and or have adjusted to remote workers in the last several years. So let's take a moment to look at the items that reflect this, and then we'll do the same kind of process here, have you go in and look at this. So starting there with that first question, I trust my team members are doing the best to fulfill their responsibilities and commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, I really want to challenge you this morning to be honest in these reflections. Because if we're looking through these items, there may be areas where we spot our own blind spots. That is the purpose of index like these. And so take a moment, go through those 5 questions, if you will. Same scoring applies, same reference points apply, 1 through 5. And I'll give you a few minutes to complete that. I do hold 3 degrees in this area, so I have to check myself here because I could easily talk for my remaining time about this particular area of teamwork and this particular area of team dynamics. But I think we all realize how important communication is to the everyday work that most of us are involved in, right? Without communication, we essentially cease to work in teams. If we're doing things completely independent, regardless of what position we hold, what status we have, it does not matter. If those things are not communicated, if others are not included in any number of ways, then we have professional challenges that are oftentimes insurmountable. And so communication is an incredibly important part of the work that we do. And yet I want you to really think for a moment about the communication challenges that remote and hybrid workers deal with especially. It's been acknowledged, I think, once or twice already this morning, but how often now over the last few years has some of us taken for granted and noticed the lack of informal conversation, small talk, water cooler talk, whatever language you want to put around it, and how much that actually mattered to some of us. Olivia, when I was filling out your instrument, I had put, and I talked to our table about this, social being so important for me in terms of my engagement. Never really realizing that until the last 4 or 5 years, how much that mattered to me. How much I keep an open door, truly, it's not an open door policy for me, it's an open door in my office that people can stop by, and many in this room can attest to. Stop by if you have something you wish to discuss, even if it's relatively minor, right? And how much those little conversations ultimately add up to bigger things. Like everybody, I close the door occasionally and have to get stuff done, but those things really start to build up, right? At least to a lot of people. And remote teams have unique challenges in this area. So take a look at some of the items here as it relates to communication. Bottom left of your index. We're about halfway through it at this point. There are some specific communication questions there, tailored to team dynamics. And I want to encourage you to take a few minutes to go through those and score them 1 through 5, please. Move into dimension 4, but again, if you want to continue on or need to finish up, you are certainly welcome to do that. But let's briefly talk about collaboration. And in particular, I want to contrast this, or at least put it side by side with what it looks like on your index there, which is communication. Because I get this question a lot. What is the difference between communication and collaboration? Well, recall some of the examples I just mentioned about communication, right? Not all of them are task-focused. Sometimes communication connects us socially, connects us emotionally, builds trust. Those aren't necessarily collaborative efforts, right? Those aren't necessarily things that are going to turn into a project or a report or will contribute to some type of tangible outcome. Collaboration is more action-focused. It is more task-focused. There are things that we need to do together in order for us to accomplish our goals. Certainly communication will be required. Certainly communication will be necessary. But the process of working together, project management, overcoming challenges, conflict management, all these things come into play when we talk about collaboration. right? And so I love the notion, and I did a deep dive on this, much deeper than I anticipated doing last week in preparation for this. The proverb, and I'll talk about that, that's part of the deep dive. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the deep dive I did was there was a long kind of history about that idea and who owns it. And a lot of people have tried to stake claim in that they've owned this, and now people just call it a proverb. It's like, well, everybody owns it, right? But it's an interesting concept that I think many of us can relate to. Right? There are certain things that I just, if it's a matter of I need it done efficiently, I'm going to do it myself, right? And I'm just going to get it done as quickly as I can. And I have 3 great team members who I've acknowledged already, but even sometimes trying to coordinate between 2 or 3 people can be more inefficient than doing something yourself, right? So if I want to go fast, I go alone. It's easier, right? There's no coordination required. There's no communication required. It's you get the job done, right? And that's something that I think a lot of us can relate to. This idea of if you want to go far. I've mentioned the MBA program several times and how this is all based on a lot of the data and information we've gathered from them. Our MBA program, online at least, is 20 months long. It's not a sprint. 20 months is almost 2 years. 2 years is not something that you just, okay, I'm going to get it done. Like, no, pace yourself, right? It's a marathon. It's something you have to work together with other people. You want to just cruise through as many courses and modules and quizzes as you want. That's one way of thinking about it, but it's not going to get you to that destination of graduation, right? We need you to collaborate. We need you to work together. We need you to understand different perspectives if you're going to get the maximum value of an MBA program or degree. All right, so look at the questions there on that middle column at the bottom. Okay, we're almost done with the questionnaire piece, which will then trigger a lot of interesting discussion, I hope, with our time that we have remaining. 5 items. Take a moment. Same scoring. In our last dimension, and then we're going to open it up. I'll share how we'll approach the discussion, and there's also a backside to this instrument. I'll explain that in a moment as well. It's not something you have to complete, but we will talk about it. Last one here is convenience. And if you are somebody, if you're an academic or just somebody who questions things in general, 1, I identify with you. But 2, you may be looking at this and say, this seems like it doesn't necessarily fit with the rest, right? The others seem very team-focused, interpersonal, people working together. This one, what? Where does this come from? This is where the remote online piece is truly felt and evident in the instrument, right? Because all of us have been in meetings. Actually, raise your hand if you haven't. Here, let me explain. All of us have been in a meeting where a remote or online team member couldn't hear somebody else. They couldn't hear you. The technology wasn't working correctly. Mic is muted. Laura has told me this like 1,000 times in meetings that we've been on. Zach, your mic's still muted. And I've returned the favor back to her 1,000 times, right? This is natural. It happens. This is captured under the convenience category, right? Because while those little things, your mic is muted, not that big a deal, right? We overcome it within a matter of seconds. But when it's habitual, when it occurs over and over again, and it limits the abilities and the collaborative efforts that we've talked about, that becomes a problem. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll turn you over to filling out this last dimension. So we were talking about this again at our table earlier. And shout out to my colleagues here at the Delphi Center. You may have seen Delphi is plastered all over many of these walls in here. But one thing I particularly applaud them for and have always appreciated is they're very intentional about inclusion, right? Very intentional about inclusion. It's baked into their DNA, right? And so online, what that looks like is something, if you've ever been to the Delphi Center at the main campus, if you've gone to the Till, you've seen like their OWL cameras. I've tried to steal one even. I tried to borrow it. I asked, I got denied. But I'm not bitter about it. But the OWL cameras, what do I like about that? Well, it's a camera that sits right here, and it puts you eye level with every single team member in the room, right? It's a 360 camera. So you can see, if you're on the other side, what others are seeing. And you can basically move around the room. Okay, somebody over here is talking, and the camera pivots and moves and captures who's talking. That's an inclusive technology. It's an inclusive decision on their part. Others put a camera up in the corner, right? We've all seen these kind of, and it's like, well, maybe they can hear us, maybe they're not, but we'll troubleshoot that later. We're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. And it's like, that's not inclusive. That's not intentional. And that's inconvenient for the users on the other end. So that's what this dimension, the essence of that dimension captures. And it can be a huge element in either alienating or including remote and hybrid team members. So do me a favor, last category there, last 5 questions. Go ahead and fill those out. And then we'll talk about what you're going to do with these scores with the time that we have remaining. All right, so a brief bit of math may be needed if you haven't already done this, but you saw at the bottom of each of those dimensions a total category, right? Simple addition there. If you would do me the favor of making sure that you have a total score for each of these 5 dimensions, right? Sum of all those individual items. For this discussion, what I'd like to do, we're going to keep it at our tables, but I'd like you to have a moment, and we're only going to have about 6 minutes here, but go around your table briefly. What was the lowest scoring area for you or your team? And I'd like you to then simultaneously take a look at the back of that index. And here's why. On the back of that index is a list of action items. We provide these to our MBA students, or will be going forward, to help them grow and strengthen and improve their team in each of these respective areas. And so I provide them to you as well. I hope that they prove helpful, not just for this instrument and this assessment, but ideas to think about going forward. I'll highlight 1 or 2 of them in the final minutes of our time together. But what I'd like to do is turn this time back to you, allow for you to discuss briefly at your table just 1 score, preferably your lowest, why you think that is, what may be contributing to it, and then also take a look at that action item sheet on the back. Is there anything from there that you might be able to adopt or implement to help you grow and strengthen and improve your score in the dimension that you are reflecting on? All right, so I'm going to give you at least these 6 minutes that I have to spare, and then I'll wrap us up briefly at the end of that. But I turn the time to you and your table. It was not nearly enough time, but hopefully you'll have a chance to unpack your scores a little more, and I'm happy to be a resource to each and every one of you if you choose to. My contact information is at the back of this, or at the very back of this. I just want to share with you one very brief anecdote / story that, in my opinion, really embodies how powerful an online community can be. So September of 2020, I was at Havana Rumba, which I believe is like 2 miles away from here. It was one of the first times I can remember eating out with my family since the pandemic began. And if you remember around that time, it was still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, right? You know, people masked everywhere, distance still. So I remember it was very weird eating in Havana Rumba, and like the 3 tables around me were like, you know, marked off and things. And I remember I'm eating there thinking, you know, okay, things are starting to get back a little bit more to normal. And I remember being a real highlight because we had 2 young kids at the time, and we were ready to get out of the house, and it was just, things were looking up, right? And I remember at that very restaurant, and I can tell you what table I was sitting at, I got a phone call from the then class president or co-president, Catherine Honegger. And Catherine was somebody who I had met months before when I took on the director role of the online MBA. And she was crying hysterically. And I remember every word of this conversation, and it's one that has fueled a lot of things since that I'm happy to share more about. But Catherine was calling to tell me that a member of her team, Kenneth Stanley Hall, had passed away. And Stanley was 36 years old. He was a beloved member by many in this room, but also by many of the community. And many thoughts ran through my mind, as you can imagine, and many things happened in the days after. But the long and short version that I want to share with you all is that many of Stanley's team members, cohort members, who never met him in person, he was a member of the online MBA, keep in mind, were so moved by him, his contributions, his character, that they went on to donate over $25,000 in a matter of 3 days to the Stanley Hall Scholarship. First ever scholarship for an online MBA program at the University of Louisville. It's an endowed scholarship. It carries on year after year after year in Stanley's name. And every year, his mother sits right next to me at the graduation dinner, and her and I talk about her son. And I think many things about Stanley, a man who I've never met. But I think one thing in particular that's relevant for all of us today is that a community can't exist online. Stanley was living proof of that. He touched a lot of people, so much so that they were moved to action in dramatic and tremendous ways. And his name continues to live on as part of our program. But his essence of community and character and what we can build together online and through relationships is quite powerful. And so I share that with you because these communities, these teams, whether they're remote, hybrid, online, purely traditional, they are worth supporting, they're worth fostering, they're worth nurturing and growing because the effects of them can be quite powerful. So thank you all for your attention today, and I appreciate your time.